So, Rabbi Mark, I know you thought it would be more engaging for people if rather than having just a sermon, I know we love sermons on Rosh Hashanah, right? But rather than just one person talking, we had two rabbis having a conversation. Was that your thought?
That was my thought. Shana Tova, everybody. And I've been thinking, and we've been talking a bit about it. This isn't scripted, but we...
Not at all.
And anything that is offensive to anybody will not be my responsibility.
It will be entirely my responsibility.
But been thinking a lot about this question and what the complicated role, not just of rabbis, but of clergy in general is in our world right now. Because it has been said that the role of a rabbi is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And I think there is a real sense to that. Like, there is a very, very important role in being a clergy and being a pastor in helping people through tough times. But also, like that first line of that prayer you just read before the shofar, like, let the shofar blast us out of our complacency. We can get very complacent in our world. And what does it mean in this world that feels really quite difficult and problematic in all kinds of ways right now, as we see all kinds of things across the world, not just in this country, that are quite disturbing. And so we've been contemplating this question about values, and when is a value a Jewish value, and when do we have to speak out? And some of this may be uncomfortable for some of you, and if it is...
it's my fault.
You know, when I was... I had the opportunity to do a service mission with AJWS, American Jewish World Service, several years ago in Ghana. And a lot of that experience was deeply uncomfortable. And they coined this term therapeutic discomfort. It's a kind of discomfort that actually helps you grow. Sarah Bracha and I were together at an interfaith convening with Together Colorado, which is affiliated nationally with Faith in Action, with a very powerful reverend who is now the deputy director of Faith in Action nationwide, and his name is Reverend Michael Ray Matthews. And at that convening, he asked us, and we were a very diverse group, I mean really properly diverse across faith traditions, definitely people of color there, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Sikhs, a very, very wide interfaith gathering. And Reverend Michael Ray Matthews asked the question, he said, "Are you a chaplain to the empire or a prophet for the resistance?" And it was a very, very powerful and provocative question, because what does it mean to be a chaplain to the empire, and what does it mean to be a prophet of the resistance? So that's part of what we're going to be thinking about out loud and talking about together. And before I ask a more directed question to my friend on the left,
literally,
I want to just acknowledge. Personally, you know, this is my 19th Rosh Hashanah at Bonei Shalom, which feels like an enormous amount of time. I can't quite actually believe it. And there have been times where some of what I've shared has upset people. And it's this constant tension of feeling the need sometimes to speak out for what is true to me. And also, one of the tensions that I feel deeply in Jewish life is, like, I feel at my core, and I think we share this, I'm a universalist. I love humanity, well,
I love humanity.
I have a deep respect for humanity in all its forms. Yeah. I believe strongly in the Torah's idea that when it says that we are created in the image of God, that is all humanity, that's not just Jewish people. And I feel like there are universalist values that are really important and really strong. And also, I am very caught in the particularism of being Jewish, of my Jewish faith, my Jewish practice, my Jewish principles, my Jewish beliefs, how I perceive the Torah to be guiding me. And sometimes that feels like a real tension. What is a value that is universalist, that is really about the whole world, and what is a value that is more particular? And there are all kinds of issues, of course, that we as a community confront. There are some people who are way more active in the political and social action sphere than I am in this community. I feel very honored to be part of a community where we do have so many activists. And there are issues that are pressing issues. And are they partisan issues, or are they issues that we have to confront and talk about? climate change being one that's obvious, systemic racism in our society, the issues of immigration, the abortion issue that has become such a big and challenging issue. And nobody in the Jewish world is on board with what's happening in this country, because it's just not a Jewish value to criminalize abortion without exceptions. Gun violence prevention. These are just some issues that Judaism actually has a lot to say about. And it's not about being partisan. It's not about taking an issue with a particular candidate or a particular individual, but there are issues that we have to think about. So I'm going to direct this question to you, Sarah Bracha. Not quite sure how to phrase the question. I mean, my original question was like, what makes a value a Jewish value? But also just how that touches on the idea of when it's okay and when it's not okay to speak what feels like politics from the pulpit. Because some people get very edgy and angry when we speak what appears to be politics from the pulpit, right?
Yeah, so, well, let's start with that and then dive into this meatier, possibly more challenging question of what makes a value a Jewish value. I want to say firstly, just in terms of that framing question of politics and the pulpit, is it appropriate to have politics in the pulpit? A very important distinction, which you touched on, is the difference between being partisan and representing a particular political viewpoint or promoting a particular political candidate, which we know that we shy away from. Although I think it's interesting to note that the right wing in this country does not shy away from that, and perhaps it's because we have more inherent belief in the importance of the separation of church and state, that we don't want to do that. But I think it's really important to say that we do have politics in the pulpit inherently, not just the wonderful prayer before hearing the shofar that we read and are asking to be motivated to action, but we have these, prayers for the country, prayers for the state of Israel. That's inherently political, to stand up at the center of a house of worship, in the center of the service, in the center, like the high point of the service where the Torahs are out, and to start praying for the government. That is a political act.
Of course, you and I grew up praying for the Queen
monarchy.
Elizabeth.
Right, exactly. A more partisan position, you might say. And what's more, not just that we pray for the government, but as we just heard, we pray for particular things. We just said nation may not lift up sword against nation, neither may we know war anymore. We're praying for particular policies. We're praying that there should be an end to war, that we should actually experience peace. That's inherently quite political. And I'll just add to that I think that this distinction between politics, the political life and spiritual life is not a Jewish distinction. That's actually a very Christian distinction, to think that you can have the life of the spirit without the life of the body. That's not what Judaism believes. We are a religion which is grounded, not just that we have to be right bein adam lamakom, between us and our Creator, but bein adam lachavaro, that we have to be right with one another, right in society. And the whole Torah, the whole Jewish tradition, is writings about, exactly as someone was saying yesterday, fair business practices and civil law. It's inherently about the public sphere and how we relate to one another. So to me, this attempt to say that there's no place to discuss politics, which means the public good and how we live with one another in society, that we shouldn't discuss this in a religious context, makes no sense. That's what religion is as well. What do you think about that, Rabbi Mark?
I think the Torah could be seen as an inherently political document. There's all kinds of radical political agendas that are put forward in the... We just finished the Shemitah year, the seventh year in the cycle. Shemitah is radical in what it suggests, that all debts are released, that all slaves are freed, that we don't plant anything, we don't grow anything, we let the land rest. I mean, it's not only radical from an agricultural point of view, it's radical from what it says about society and about resetting the imbalances that naturally occur in a capitalist society. I'll say that word because it is about like when the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and there's this sense like in the seventh year, you reset that balance, and that's inherently political, and we've just finished living that seventh year, not just in the land of Israel, but these days, thanks to organizations like Hazon, there's a lot of deep questions of conscious thought about, like, what does it mean to observe the sabbatical, right? The Torah says 36 times in some form or another, love and respect the stranger, the ger, the outsider. Now, rabbinic tradition makes the ger a sojourner, or someone who has come from the outside but has somehow converted to Judaism, or might be that. But that's not, I don't think, what the original meaning of the Torah is at all. It's the outsider. It's the person on the outside. We could say it's the refugee. So I think Judaism demands that we take care of our refugees. And I'm thrilled that we have a Tikkun Olam committee that has adopted an Afghan family. I don't know if Paula Ayres is still here, but she and Marilyn and others have been doing a tremendous amount to take care of this Afghan refugee family who are here. And I think the responsibility of refugees, we don't send them on buses and planes. We actually take care of them in our own communities. And that's, I think, fundamentally what the Torah asks us to do. So in that sense, like, it gets pretty tricky when you start seeing things that offend your sense that are connected to particular partisan positions. But, like, I think the issues themselves are pretty clearly rooted in our tradition.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the stranger, and you mentioned also abortion just before. Places where we can say firmly, Jewish values absolutely indicate that we support immigrants, we support the stranger, we support refugees, 100%. That, as you said before, B'Tselem Elohim, we see all of humanity as being embodiments of the divine, that we are all created in the image of God, and therefore we have inalienable human rights. With these values, it's comfortable for us to say these are Jewish values and we agree with them, but this is the bit where we maybe get really uncomfortable. But what about where our Jewish values, the things which truly are at the core of Jewish tradition, we have some, like I mentioned, that we can be like fully on board with, but we have some other ones which might, for us as universalists or humanitarians, be a great deal more problematic. And I'll just sort of name a couple which are truly fundamental to Judaism. Number one, not just that we should have one God, but that we should be very, very hostile to any other representations or images of God. And actually, it's incumbent on us to destroy the religious imagery of other religions. And, God forbid, but funny to say that, God forbid. But from my perspective, God forbid. We're not thank God, in a position where we would actually be, doing it. It's a pogrom against Hindu icons or anything like that. But that's what the Jewish tradition says. It also says, we have a very, very we have a claim to a particular piece of land that completely overrides any other factors, any rights of the people already living there or anything like that. We also have a very, very, very strong emphasis on making decisions about somebody else's body, not your own body, which are irreversible, and which, as humanists and universalists, we might say stand directly contrary to all of our values in every other context. So what do we do about those Jewish values?
Well,
Rabbi?
They're profound questions, obviously, and there's, the rabbis say there are shivim panim el ha-Torah, like there are 70 faces to the Torah, which has always been an indication that there are multiple ways to interpret the Torah. We can't take the Torah at face value. We can't take the Torah without the commentaries and the understandings of thousands of years of generations of rabbi. None of us are descendants of biblical Judaism. We're all descendants of rabbinic Judaism, and the rabbis, there's things like you could say, well, the Torah also says, more than once, an eye, ayin tachit ayin, shein tachit shein, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. And the famous quote from Gandhi, if we followed this, the whole world will be, blind and toothless. And the whole idea that from very, very early on, the rabbis of the Talmud said that does not literally mean we take out each other's eyes and teeth. It means that we estimate like you said, the laws of damages. We estimate the damages caused, the lack of income, etc., that is caused by someone who has been in a position where they've been in some way disabled through an act of ours, and we make it a monetary thing. So that's one thing. I would also say that, I think Judaism is fundamentally non-fundamentalist. Like the whole idea of a fundamentalist position is that you take these texts to literally to mean only one thing, and you can't entertain that they can mean multiple things. So yes, we have, and actually interestingly, last year we had a similar discussion on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. People may remember with our rabbinic intern last year, Hindi Finman, who was talking about like what she does when the texts of our tradition get really challenging. And it's like, I think what we don't push them away, we don't ignore them, we don't erase them from our tradition. We look at them and reevaluate them, and we are able to say no. We're able to say no. God does not want us to sacrifice our children. Like, no, God does not want us to wipe out the iconography and the religious buildings of other people. God does not want these things. And so it's like this evolving tradition. Maybe that's a fudgy answer, but it is true for me. It's like I can't bear some of those things in the Torah. I can't bear some of the misogyny in the Torah. I can't bear like some of the rituals. But I think the rabbis of the Talmud were equally uncomfortable with a lot of those things. You know, in the Talmud class that we've been doing at Bonei Shalom, some of us have been studying for, I don't know, 6-7 years. I don't know, how long is it, Judy? I don't know, a lifetime. We've been studying Masechet Sota. And Sota is the tradition in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, that talks about what you do with a woman who's suspected of adultery. And it's a pretty horrible and grim ritual. And it seems, as you study the text of the Talmud, that the rabbis also thought it was grim and horrible, and they wanted to find a way to make it effectively impossible that it would ever be carried out, the ritual. In the same way that there is a piece of Torah that says that if a teenage child doesn't listen to their parents, they should be taken out to the gates of the city and stoned to death, right? I mean, I don't think we want to do that to our young people.
We might want to do that to our young people.
But the rabbis of the Talmud say it never happened, and it was just there as a warning that children should listen to their parents, right? And another example would be the Torah seems clearly to promote capital punishment, right? There's a lot of people in the Jewish world who are very passionately fighting against capital punishment. There are a lot of states where it's still legal, and there's a lot of people on death row in this country. And you would say, well, the Torah seems to say capital punishment is okay. The rabbis of the Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin said a Beit Din, a religious court that tries a case and issues a case of capital punishment one time in 70 years is an inhumane and barbaric court. So the rabbis clearly did not want there to be capital punishment, even though we're going to be doing in a minute, the Unatane Tokef, that's going to talk about all the horrible ways that a human being can die. And it says who by stoning and who by being thrown off a cliff, basically, which were some of the traditional capital punishments that exist in the Torah, but they've been written out of the book. So I think I said a lot just then. Respond.
I had a great point. What was it? Not scripted. I think that, you're absolutely right. There are places where the rabbinic tradition has been at pains to circumscribe what the Bible says for a very long time, as in the case of capital punishment. And, fortunately or unfortunately, the Jewish people, until very recently, has been in a position where they didn't have political power to enact death penalties and such, making it kind of easy to fudge these things, easier. But what about where the rabbinic tradition pushes in the other direction? For instance, the Torah doesn't have much to say about not eating. It says some things about what we can eat, what we can't eat. The Talmud takes it a lot further in terms of trying to basically make it so that Jews don't sit down to eat with non-Jews. That's not really a value that we hold. But if you follow the thrust of the tradition, if you say it's all about going in the direction that the rabbis take it, what about cases like that? And also what about cases where the rabbis could have gone in the direction, as Christianity did, of saying, Brit Milah, like circumcision, it means like circumcise your heart. Same as we use the word circumcision to talk about your heart. It means it in an allegorical way. It doesn't mean like in a literal, physical way. That's definitely not the way the rabbinic tradition has taken the issue of circumcision until now, this generation is really the first generation, I think, for a long time where it's kind of coming into question in a public way. So what about that when the rabbis take it, or don't take it in any direction away from those original intents, or take it in a direction we don't like? Rabbi?
for me, it's about, we're going to come to Musaf soon, which is such a powerful piece of the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, and I hope you'll all stay, by the way. But like, there's this constant tension between, like you were saying, between it's not Jewish to separate the body and the soul. We are, intrinsically connected. I had the great honor when I was making a film in 2012 about the Baal Shem Tov to sit for several hours in Newton, Massachusetts with Susanna Heschel, Dr. Susanna Heschel, the daughter of Abraham Joshua Heschel. And one of the things she said about her father that was that so moved me and so struck with me is that he always by his bedside there would be like a Hasidic Sefer, a book of like deep Hasidic Torah, and a copy of the New York Times. And like he embodied someone who was deeply connected to the spiritual teachings of Judaism, and he was deeply, deeply in the world. So I don't have a direct answer to that particular question. I get it, and I'm challenged by it in different ways. But for me, as a rabbi of a community that is somewhat diverse, but actually not very diverse at all when it really comes down to it, I feel like it's about just paying attention to what people care about. And yes, there are people in this generation who are asking questions about Brit Milah that haven't necessarily been asked in previous generations. And so it's not about me having an answer or me say, although I do strongly still believe in the ritual of Brit Milah, but I think it's about being open to the fact that there are different feelings and different ideas about some of these traditions. There are very different views about Israel in our community. There's some, and that we can find a way, because that to me is a very, very Jewish value, is finding a way to remain in community and to remain in dialogue with each other, even if we strongly disagree with each other. The whole foundational idea of machlochet l'shem shamayim, the idea that we can disagree with each other and our disagreements can be for the sake of heaven, is a very, very powerful idea. So it's not that we have to agree with each other, but I think as a rabbi, I feel I have to listen. I have to be able to listen to people who may have views very different to my own in either direction. I said this in my Rosh Hashanah sermon last year. I feel like I'm more of a centrist than I've ever been. So I'd actively want to listen to people who are to the left of me. And to people who are people who are to the right of me, because I want to know what is important to people, and then we can look together about how they jive or don't jive with the values of the Torah and our tradition. So.
Yeah, I love that you said that machlochet l'shem shamayim. I was going to say exactly the same thing, that we also have this value of actually like Davka being in conflict, of arguing. The Talmud is a record of debate. It's not so much a record of like what the bottom line answer is. It's a record of what the difficult conversation is. And this is a deeply Jewish value, to not be afraid of disagreeing with each other and not be afraid to state our reasoning and to get into it and to sit there, as the Talmud says, swords sharpening swords. Your chavruta, your study partner, is someone, you sharpen each other's arguments, you sharpen each other's minds through engaging in this way, and through that you can come to this place. We also have this wonderful phrase in the Talmud, Elu ve'elu divrei chai Elohim chayim. Both these and these are the words of the ever-living God. Like we live in a paradoxical space, and we attribute that paradox actually to the source of being, the whole of existence. In the words of Rabbi Nachman, the Chalal HaPanui, God has to vacate a certain amount of, God has to make God's self less, as it were, in order for this dimension to exist at all. So our entire reality takes place within an ongoing and very, very fertile paradox. And embracing that, it seems to me, is a very Jewish value.
It's interesting because that concept of Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim, that these words and these words are the words of a true and living God, are in reference to the disagreements between Hillel and Shammai, the famous two rabbis who always disagree with it. But the Talmud then goes on to say, well, wait a minute, if these are both the words of a living God, why is why does the halakha almost always go, why does the law almost always go with Hillel and not Shammai? And the answer comes because Hillel always quoted Shammai's opinion first and always treated the students of Shammai with love and respect. And so this idea that we can, it's in a legal precedent, I think you do always, I'm not a lawyer, but there are plenty of lawyers out there, that in a legal situation, you will often quote the words of the dissenting opinion before your own, right? Is that true? Sometimes?
It makes for a good argument. You want to set up the other guy's argument and then knock it down and show why yours is right.
Yeah, but I think in the terms of the Talmud, it's quoted as being a really positive thing to say, well, I am willing to really accept that there is another way of looking at this issue, and my lovely learned friends in the Beit Shammai, in the house of Shammai, say this, and that's wonderful, but I say this, and because of that way of treating the other, then according to the Talmud anyway, that was always the favorable opinion. Anyhow, so I think we could wrap this up fairly quickly, but so that we got the tension between the universal and the particular, which we've sort of addressed, but it's still a little bit uncomfortable in some ways, and you may have something to say to that. And also I think that between the spiritual and the physical, that whole idea of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel having a New York Times and a very deep mystical book by his bed. And I think as we prepare to make the transition between this conversation and our Musaf service, it would be good to sort of start thinking about how we carry sort of ritual and spiritual practice in our being, and at the same time that we are activists in the world doing what we can to bring about change, to bring about more justice, and how we resolve those tensions, or if we resolve those tensions. Do you have thoughts on that?
So paradoxically, I just want to end with...
It's all a paradox.
It's all a paradox, right. And actually, the Talmud says that Rabbi Meir, the husband of Beria, his Torah was actually even higher, and he found kind of the contrary opinion to everything, but it was so high we can't follow it. So, they actually seed into it, the idea of, we know we're actually kind of not, ultimately right, but we're just sort of picking the path that we think people will be able to follow, and that's of higher value, ultimately, than being truly as right as we could be, also a Jewish value, I think. But in terms of the spiritual and the material, I just want to say I think there's something so amazing about second day Rosh Hashanah, and I've been feeling it all morning since I arrived, which is that it really feels like this more than any other holy day of the year, and more than any other second day of Yom Tov during the year. It really feels like we're standing on the shoulders of yesterday's prayers, yesterday's work, really in this profound way. The spiritual work that we did, coupled with the physical work we are doing right now by being back here again in community again to do this service again, really can take us to a place we can't get to any other time. So that's my thought right now about the spiritual and the physical, and where we are in the service as we're about to turn our hearts and our minds and our mouths to the Musaf service, the real core of our spiritual practice during these days. We should all be matzliach, we should be successful and really, really, really going there and praying for real, because our prayers do matter to us who hear them on the inside, and to the source of everything, who's also tapped into the work that we as Jews are doing around the world today. And I want to finish on that paradoxical note with a plug for the particular. When I thought, what would Judaism be without, these
Musaf.
without Musaf, without these particularist practices, which or ideals or identities, which, as I said, can be very, very challenging. It also occurs to me that there's great value to having a particular indigeneity and a particular cultic and ritual practice, maybe davka the things that go cut against the grain of the secular world or the liberal world. And it struck me that, when we think about the liberal world, I don't like using this term snowflake, I think that it's pejorative, but this sort of charge that's leveled against liberals, that they kind of melt in the face of challenge. Maybe our particularist practices, which go against the grain of some universalist ideals actually really help to strengthen us. And to me, one of the greatest particularist practices of all of Judaism is our calendar. Not just that we take time off, but that we sanctify different moments and seasons of the year with very, very specific particular practices and prayers and also foods and other such good things. But here we are at precisely one of those times. So I think, let's call on the universalism. This is Yom Hadin, where the whole world is standing in judgment, and we're praying for God to remember God's inherent nature of compassion and mercy, not just for us, not just for the Jews, but for this whole dimension, for this whole planet, and everyone and everything here. We're really praying for everyone, but we're doing it today, because that's what the particularity of our tradition tells us to do, is to do it yesterday and today, to show up and do it now.
Beautiful. Well, I think we probably
it's engaging, but it's not that engaging.
Well, I think we did more of comforting the afflicted than afflicting the comforted, but that's okay. I think...
well, I think the thing is that everyone's comfortable and everyone's afflicted.
Yeah. Look, the reality is the world is, we feel the mess of the world. And it's easy to throw up our hands in despair and say, there's nothing that I can really do. It's just we've gone too far beyond, whether it's, whether we're feeling the possibility that democracy in our world is ending, or whether we're feeling
just
like
in this country.
Climate change. I don't know. Have you seen what's going on in Italy and Sweden right now? And China? What? Yeah. But I think to Reb Bracha's last point, there's something, some of you know I've been engaged a lot in re-engaging in my past life as an actor. And the acting teacher, Sanford Meisner, who was a method acting teacher in the 1960s and 70s, he said that acting is about living truthfully even in imaginary circumstances. And I think our prayer life has to be like that too. We go into a musaf that has all kinds of imagery that we might find really, really difficult, but we enter into it. When we take those 3 steps forward into our prayer, we enter into it as if it is real, even though we know it's imaginary. Imaginary in the sense that we're using our spiritual imaginations to think that actually our prayers on this Rosh Hashanah, like Reb Bracha was saying, can have a power, that we can bust open the universe to bring change to our world in all of the areas where we think change is not possible, and that we can continue being activists in the way that many of us are activists and doing what we can to help the world, to help humanity, and in our particularity we can enter deeply into these prayers and do it like we believe it. Ready?
Or as we believe it.
As we believe it.
Yeah. So, some of us believe it. It's
Ki'ilu.
imaginal, not
The
imaginary.
rabbis use over and over again this word ki'ilu. They say you walk into your prayer, those 3 steps we walk into the prayer. Ki'ilu ata omed lifnei melech basar v'dam. As if you are entering the presence of King Charles III. As if you are standing in front of a flesh and blood king. And what that means is not that I'm actually think of God as King Charles III, or that I think of God as any other king. But I think, what does that do for me if I enter the presence of a king? Going into the presence of the being that is most powerful, that could literally cut my head off or answer my deepest petition. And to have that kind of intensity when we enter into prayer. But they say ki'ilu. They're asking us to use our imaginations to enter that space. All right, I think we've been talking enough. Have we? Any last word?
It's a dangerous question to ask me. I'll say one tiny more thing to lead us into prayer. You spoke before of how the rabbis, in their wisdom, understood that the Torah readings we need for these days and the Haftarah readings are readings which focus on the prayers and the tears of the brokenhearted. And in the case of these stories, often mothers. But for all of us, whether we're mothers or not, or whether we're women or not, whether we're parents or not, that we can resonate with the image of the mother who's lost her child. This is the most tragic image. And we can also use it as a way to find that tenderness and heartbrokenness within ourselves. Because I think the other thing which is key to remember on this day is what the Talmud teaches, that even if the gates to prayer are locked, the gates of tears are always open. That's what it says. The gates of tears will not be locked. So if we can find that place to actually, let our hearts break open and cry for the pain and the desecration and the terror of the world, then it moves beyond the realm of imagination and into the real. Beautiful. So I encourage us to be there.
Wow, amen to that. Sharei Dima, the gates of tears.
Sharei Dima lo ninalu.